Quarantine. It's a word we've all gotten very familiar with lately, right? But behind that simple word, there's this incredible public health tool with a deep history, some fascinating science, and a really complex legal framework. So today, we're going to break it all down, how this essential and, let's be honest, often really burdensome practice actually works. So, what's our roadmap for this? Well, first up, we're going to clear up a common mix-up, the difference between quarantine and isolation. Then, we'll take a trip back in time to its wild origin story. After that, we'll dive into the science that makes it work, ask who actually has the legal muscle to enforce it, and finally, we'll tackle the tough balancing act it forces us to confront today. All right, first things first. These two words get thrown around like they're the same thing all the time. But in the world of public health, they mean totally different things. And honestly, getting this right is the key to understanding everything else we're about to talk about. Okay, so let's just settle this once and for all. What is the real difference? It actually boils down to one very simple question. Is the person known to be sick, or were they just maybe exposed to someone who was? And here it is, the official breakdown. Think of it this way. Quarantine is for someone who's been exposed but isn't sick yet. It's a wait-and-see period for people who might become contagious. Isolation, on the other hand, is for people who are already confirmed to be sick. The goal there is to keep them away from healthy people so they don't spread it. So, simple version, quarantine is for exposure, isolation is for sickness. Now that we're clear on what it is, let's look at where the heck it came from. And to do that, we have to travel way back in time. I'm talking 14th century Europe, when the Black Death was tearing the continent apart and the powerful port city of Venice was desperately trying to figure out how to survive. And the whole key to this story, believe it or not, is this number, 40. In fact, our modern word quarantine comes straight from the Italian phrase 40 giorni, which literally just means 40 days. And this wasn't just some random number. It was the specific length of time that would change public health forever. You know, this whole thing didn't just appear out of nowhere. It actually evolved in a few key steps. It kicked off in 1377 in Ragusa, where they started with a 30-day rule. But by the early 1400s, Venice took that idea and supercharged it, bumping the time up to 40 days and even creating entire islands, the famous lazarettos, just to hold ships and their crews. And you know what? It worked so well that the idea spread like wildfire all across Europe. Okay, but why 40? I mean, they didn't have modern virology back then, so what gives? Was it just a lucky guess, or was there some actual logic behind picking that specific number? Well, it turns out it was a mashup of three different things. First, you had ancient Greek medical ideas from Hippocrates, which suggested that if you had an acute disease, it would show itself within about 40 days. Second, the number 40 was just culturally huge in medieval Europe. It pops up all over the Bible for periods of trial and purification. And third, and this is the amazing part, it was a fortunate coincidence. For the bubonic plague, waiting 40 days was actually more than enough time to see if someone was sick. It was scientifically sound, almost by sheer luck. Okay, so fast forward to today. Obviously, we're not just crossing our fingers and relying on ancient texts anymore. So let's jump from the history to the modern science that tells us exactly why quarantine works so well. The modern replacement for that old 40-day rule is a concept you've probably heard of, the incubation period. It's basically just that waiting window between when you're exposed to a germ and when you actually start to feel sick. Figuring out a disease's specific incubation period is absolutely critical because it tells officials exactly how long a quarantine needs to be to actually work. Now, to get a little nerdy for a second, but stick with me, this is really cool, we have to look at how diseases spread. Scientists use this thing called R0, which is basically a score that tells us how many people one sick person is likely to infect. And the math behind it shows us exactly where quarantine does its magic. Now, I know this formula looks a little intense, but it's really just multiplying three things together. But the one we really care about for this conversation is that little guy in the middle, C bar. That represents the average rate of contact between people. And that right there, that is the entire ball game. That's the whole reason quarantine exists. Its entire job is to mathematically attack that one specific number. By taking someone who might be sick out of the general population, you absolutely crush their contact rate. You break the chain of transmission before it can even get going. It's that simple and that powerful. Okay, so we know what it is, and we know the science behind why it works, but that brings up a really big question. Who actually gets to tell you, hey, you have to stay home? This is where the law and public health collide.
So, at the state and local level, the authority comes from this really old legal idea called police power. Now, don't let the name fool you, it's not just about cops. It's the basic built in power a government has to protect the health, safety, and general well being of its people, even if that means temporarily limiting what individuals can do.
And this right here really lays out how this power is split up in the US. You've got the federal government, mostly through the CDC, whose job is to stop diseases from coming into the country or spreading between states. But then you have the state and local governments using that police power to handle outbreaks inside their own borders. And as you can imagine, the rules can be pretty different from one state to the next.
And you should know the federal government can't just declare a quarantine for any old thing. The CDC's power is limited to a specific list of diseases set by the president. It includes some old school scary stuff like plague and smallpox, but also more modern threats like SARS, COVID-19, and as of 2021, even measles is on that list.
And all of this brings us right up to the present day and to the core challenge of this powerful tool. It's this tough balancing act between keeping everyone safe and protecting our individual freedoms. You know, I think this quote from a global policy analysis just nails it. Quarantine is a complex tool that is both essential and burdensome. It's a perfect description of a double-edged sword. It's something we absolutely need, but wow, does it come at a price? And here it is, that balancing act, laid out for us to see. On one side, the benefits are huge, right? You stop the disease in its tracks, you protect the entire community, and you buy precious time for scientists to develop things like vaccines. But the costs on the other side, they're just massive. Economic chaos, a serious psychological toll, and a fundamental restriction of our liberty. So, because those costs are so incredibly high, the big push in public health now is to get smarter and more precise. The goal is to move away from these massive one-size-fits-all lockdowns and toward more targeted tools, like super-fast contact tracing and isolating sick people right away. The idea is to get all the life-saving benefits with much less of the collateral damage. And that really leaves all of us with the big question we have to grapple with. When the next health crisis hits, we know what tools we have in the toolbox, but figuring out exactly how to use them, when to use them, and who to use them on, that's going to force us to weigh these same difficult trade-offs all over again. The question isn't if quarantine works. We know it does. The real question is, how do we learn to wield this powerful, ancient tool wisely?